Welcome, everyone. We're excited to share our pick of episodes from the 1980s that we've compiled for you. These are stories that stuck with us, not just because they're strange or hard to explain, but because they echo a time that shaped who we are. Growing up in Sweden in the 80s shaped a lot of what we do today. It was a great time in many ways, but let's be honest, it wasn't exactly magical or fantastical. Sweden was already a deeply secular country. Most of us had 2 TV channels, and if you grew up in a farming community, like some of us did, you lived in a world where common sense ruled the day. Keeping your feet on the ground was seen as a virtue. Dreaming too big or believing too much in yourself? That was something people side-eyed. There wasn't all that much to feed the imagination. In school, we read the Swedish working-class canon, stories filled with grime, hard labor, hunger, and death. The churches, stripped of mystery since the Reformation, didn't offer much comfort or wonder either. Even the priest didn't seem to believe the communion wine turned into blood. But in that stripped-down world, something started to stir. A quiet longing. A hunger for the magical, the mysterious, the otherworldly. Maybe that's why Sweden in the 80s became such fertile ground for role-playing games and speculative storytelling. A lot of us were searching for something romantic, uncanny, just beyond reach. The cases we've chosen here aren't just about UFOs or strange lights in the sky. They carry the texture of the time. That in-between feeling, the liminal mood of a decade caught between economic boom and the digital age, between childhood and whatever came after. We're always happy whenever we get chance to revisit that space in time. Our first case is from 1983 and involves a game of chess that ends in a way none of the players could have foreseen. Picture this. You're sitting across from your opponent, fully focused, when suddenly they vanish into thin air right before your eyes. No explanation, no warning, just gone. It would still be several years before shows like The X-Files and Twin Peaks fed our craving for the strange and unexplained. But for this chess player, reality delivered a mystery no TV show could match. It is late afternoon on New Year's Day, 1983. In an apartment in Kalmar, southeastern Sweden, 2 young men are playing chess. One is the 25-year-old son of the house, and the other is a friend, who is a few years younger. The son moves a black bishop, and his friend counters with a white rook while sighing loudly. Actually, they are quite bored with the chess game, but this is the only thing they can think of to do. New Year's Day is a holiday and everything is closed, from cinemas to bars. In addition, there are only 2 TV channels in Sweden in the 80s, and on one of them is Ivanhoe, which they have already seen 100 times because it is always shown on New Year's Day, and the other one is off the air. In the next room, the father is reading a book. His wife has gone to work the night shift at a retirement home, and he is taking the opportunity to rest. Although he had gone to bed just after midnight on New Year's Eve, he is tired and has difficulty focusing on the text. His mind wanders and he finds himself dozing off from time to time. In the living room, however, the chess game continues. The son makes his move. Black pawn to e5, and his friend immediately makes his counter move, white knight to f3. He looks up at his opponent triumphantly. Suddenly, the bedroom door opens. The father is surprised because it is just him, his son, and his friend at home. It had been at least 15 years since his son had disturbed him while he is resting. After switching his eyes from the text in the book to the figure in the doorway, he sees that it is not his son, but his son's friend standing there. "What is going on?" the father immediately asks. It takes a little while for the young man to say what he has to say, as if he finds the whole thing very uncomfortable. Finally, however, he only asks briefly if the father has seen his son. The father doesn't really understand what he means at first. Just before he went to his room to rest, they had both been sitting on the sofa playing chess. The young man says that he is gone. The father still doesn't understand and asks what he means by that. He replies that he had just moved a chess piece, and when he looked up he was gone, as if he had vanished into thin air. The The father smiles and gets up from the bed. He calls his son's name and goes to the bathroom door and knocks. There is no answer, so he knocks and calls again. Finally, he feels the handle, and the door is unlocked. He turns on the bathroom light and sees that it is empty. He goes back out into the hallway and into his son's bedroom. The door is half open, and it is also empty. He goes back through the living room and into the kitchen, but he doesn't find him there either. He goes back to the living room, where his friend looks questioning. The father walks past him and out into the hallway again. On his way to the front door, he opens the broom closet, feeling very silly. Why would his 25-year-old son hide in the broom closet? But of course, the closet is also empty, and the father continues to the front door. He opens the door and calls his son's name out into the stairwell. He waits a short while before turning back inside. He shouts to his son's friend that the jacket and shoes are still in the hallway. Is he joking with us? He asks himself, having never seen this behavior in his son before. To be on the safe side, he goes back to his son's room and looks at the last place he can think of where he might be, under the bed. He kneels down and looks, but all he sees is a dusty old table hockey game and some socks. He stands up and shakes his head. Now all that remains is to wait. It is New Year's Day and everything is closed. Moreover, he must have gone out in the cold without his jacket and shoes. "He is here!" the son's friend calls out. When the father comes back into the living room, he first sees the friend staring at the sofa. And when he also looks at the sofa, he does indeed see his son sitting there. He is even paler. Sweat is dripping from his temples, and he is struggling to keep his arms and legs still. "Where did you go?" asks his friend. "I don't want to travel again," the son answers with panic in his voice. The father and the friend look at each other with concern. Both are equally paralyzed by the strangeness of what is happening. It's impossible that he could have gotten out and back through the front door without one of them noticing. And it's also impossible that he could have hidden somewhere in the apartment. "Come and hold me. I don't want to leave again," cries the son. They both go and sit on either side of him. "There was a bright light and I was picked up by a spaceship." The father does not know what to think. It is obvious that the son is delusional, yet he cannot explain that he actually disappeared. "Hold on to me," he shouts. The panic in his voice is clear, and both the father and his friend take a firm grip on each arm. Suddenly, everything went gray and I was back home again. In just a few seconds, he starts to shake and turns bright red all over his body. Even the whites of his eyes turn red. They barely manage to keep him on the couch. However, the friend begins to lose his strength and screams everything he can in his ear, and then he suddenly stops shaking. The father tells the friend to stay seated while he runs to the hallway and calls an ambulance. When the paramedics arrive, they also have 2 police officers with them. But the son willingly accompanies the ambulance, and both the father and the friend go to Kalmar Hospital. The first thing the doctors do is to check if he has been drinking alcohol, but he has very little alcohol in his body, probably just residue from the previous New Year's Eve celebrations. They also examine his general condition but find no particular problems, but he is kept overnight as a safety measure, and more tests are carried out the following day. Although the article does not say if these revealed anything special. However, also according to the article, the police confirmed that 2 men had accompanied the ambulance in what they described as a case of mental illness. The father says he never believed in such things before, but now claims, as does the son, that it was not a case of psychosis but a real abduction. The father also claims that the son has no history of mental illness in the past. Our next case is one of the channel's earliest creations, and contains everything that characterizes a classic UFO story. A lone car on a deserted country road in the middle of the night. A strange craft that suddenly appears out of the darkness. Small beings behaving threateningly, and a terrifying experience that forever changed the life of the main witness. It would have been easy to dismiss this story as just another odd anecdote. One man's wild fantasies, brought on by fatigue or an overactive imagination. But there is one detail that makes us pause and reflect. An independent witness, someone who did not know the main witness, reported something very specific. He claimed to have seen a dark object hovering above the car at exactly the time the main witness said the experience occurred. How do we explain this? Is it a coincidence? Or is there more beneath the surface than we first thought? It is early morning, Friday, February 3rd, 1984. At a hospital bed in southern Sweden, a police officer is questioning a 41-year-old man named Ante Jonsson. The reason for this is that around 10 to 2 in the morning, the police had received a call from another man, traveling north on Road 30 from Tingsryd. The caller, who initially had wished to remain anonymous, then gave the name Bengt Johansson. He reported that he had seen a car standing crosswise with its lights off and a black object hovering over the car. No sound or light was visible. Possibly there was a person in the car or outside. He had become very frightened and had not dared to drive on, but had turned back to the village he had just passed to call the police from a telephone booth. The police who received the call had asked the man to stay at the phone booth until they arrived. But when the police arrived at the designated meeting place, the caller was not there, and they had instead gone to the location where the caller said the car he had reported was located. Sure enough, the two police officers found a car parked in a snowbank. The police report states, a man named Ante Jonsson was sitting behind the wheel. The driver's side door was open, the lights were off. A telephoto lens in a case was next to the car. As it had recently snowed, it could be observed that the car had driven around the intersection several times. Footprints in the snow showed that the driver had entered an off-ramp about 100 meters away, stepped, kicked the snow, and turned back. The man's muscles in his arms and hands were very tense. His fingers were curled like claws. He was shaking violently. The police officers had decided to take Ante to the central hospital in Växjö. At 02:30, they left the scene with Ante in the police car, and 20 minutes later they arrived at the hospital. In the medical records, the doctor described Ante as completely shocked, hyperventilating and staring at the ground. The doctor also described that Ante's fingers were cramped and bent. The doctor gave Ante a shot of Valium and then tried to make contact with him. However, he had not come out of his psychological shock and only responded briefly when spoken to. When the sedative had taken effect, the doctor asked him if he had been through something terrible and received a short yes answer. When asked if he felt scared, he answered the same way. He then fell asleep, and when he woke up, he looked very anxious and stared around without being able to speak. When the doctor called Ante's wife, she was told that he had never shown any signs of mental illness and that he was perfectly healthy. After examination, they also confirmed the wife's statement. Apart from the shock, he was completely healthy and there were no signs of mental illness. When the policeman now asks Ante to tell him what he has been through, Ante replies that the police must keep what he is going to tell them a secret because he is afraid of being laughed at by the public. He then tells the police officer, "I was visiting some friends. We had a late dinner, and then I showed them some pictures I had taken, because I am very interested in photography. I drive on the road from Växjö towards Tingsryd where I live. I have about 15 minutes of driving left before I get home. The temperature shows 0 degrees, and it is slippery. I'm already driving slowly, and slow down further when I come to a place where I know moose usually pass. I've been close to colliding with a moose there before. Then I see a small figure on the other side of the road, and my first thought is that it's a child. As I ponder what a child is doing on the road in the middle of the night, I see something through the left side window that makes me look twice. I slow down to walking speed and roll down the windshield to get a better look. Out there, at the far end of the meadow, I see a large oblong object floating a few meters above the ground. It would have been almost 100 meters away and appeared to be almost 80 meters long and between 5 and 10 meters high. It looked like a submarine with curved ends and something sticking up in the middle. No light could be seen from the object. It was completely black. This made me think of the person I had just met and that he must have seen the object too. But when I looked through the rear window, I couldn't see the figure anymore. I continued to look at the object and found that it did not make any sound. The only sound was the engine noise of my own car. I thought about my camera and how amazing it would be if I could take a picture of such a strange object. I always have my camera with me when I drive long distances, but this time, of course, I hadn't brought it with me. So I decided to drive home to get it and take a chance that the strange craft stayed in place. As soon as I could, despite the slippery road, I continued home, rushed inside and grabbed my camera. When I returned to the scene, the object was gone. I drove slowly past the place where I had previously seen the object and looked around on both sides of the road. I decided to turn the car around at a turnoff 300 meters before the meadow where I had previously seen the object to go home and sleep. But just before I was about to slow down to turn the car around, I suddenly saw something blocking the road just past the intersection. I slammed on the brakes in a panic to avoid crashing into it, but because it was so slippery, I skidded and spun a full circle on the road. When I finally stopped the car, it was only a few meters away from the large object I had seen earlier in the meadow. It was completely matte. However, I could see that the object was wobbling a little, and I perceived that the front end was facing me. The object was 50-60 meters wide and maybe 20-30 meters high. Now I was really scared, and my only thought was to get out of there. I turned the car around to get away from the object, but I stepped on the gas too hard and slid uncontrollably into a snowdrift on the side of the road. When I tried to back out of the snowdrift, the car got stuck. However, when I glanced at the object, I was relieved to find that it was gone. I opened the car door to try to push the car free and had just got my foot out when I felt something grab my left arm. It was a small creature, about 120 centimeters tall, and wearing some kind of hood that hid its face. The body shape looked square, just like the head. I don't remember what the arms and hands looked like, and I couldn't see any legs. Maybe the hood was hiding them. The creature pulled me out of the car with surprising strength. I screamed and tried to pull myself out of its grip. I managed to free myself and started running towards some houses that I knew were nearby. But I only got a few meters before some new creatures appeared in the dark and jumped on me. They pulled clothes and tried to get me off the road. Soon, I also understood why. When I looked in the direction that the creatures were trying to drag me, I saw a large black object again. Maybe it was another one, or maybe it was the same as before. It was hovering 20 meters above the ground, by some open fields about 150 meters away. I totally panicked and struggled to get free. But then the surroundings were suddenly illuminated by a car. The creatures let go and disappeared, and I saw a truck rolling and slowing down before crossing the road. I tried to run back to the car, but fell to the ground exhausted, or maybe it was the shock. The last few meters I crawled in the snow, my legs couldn't carry me. Back in the car, I immediately locked all the doors. I don't know how long I sat there, but when I heard someone knocking on the window, I was convinced that the creatures were back. Soon, however, I saw that there were 2 policemen, and I dared to open the car door. After this, I don't remember anything else until I woke up here in the hospital. The police officer lifts the pen from the notepad and looks at Ante. He doesn't know what to think. Ante asks him again to keep it all secret. He doesn't want to be laughed at. The doctor's final assessment was that he had suffered pure mental shock. After being questioned by the police, he was taken by ambulance to a psychiatric clinic in Växjö, where he stayed for a few days. A time that Ante himself likened to one long scene from the movie One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. The police kept their word, but as no further action was taken by them or any other authorities, Ante's disappointment grew. No one seemed to take his story seriously, so he finally contacted a newspaper and revealed the whole story. The result was a major article on November 22nd that year. But the police had not been completely disinterested. As early as 15 p.m. on the same day he had his experience, a police patrol was sent out to the scene to try to find something that could explain what had actually happened. However, although the 2 police officers searched a large area around the site, a report later stated that nothing could be found to explain the complainant's visual hallucination. On the very same day that Ante Jonsson left the psychiatric clinic, the criminal police in Växjö contacted him for an interview at the scene. For over an hour, Ante was questioned while a police officer measured the site, made sketches, and took notes. There was no civil or military air traffic in the area where he was attacked, and no other military activities were taking place. But other than that, most of the details of Ante's story were difficult to confirm. There are, however, some circumstances that may corroborate Ante's story in some respects. 1. Ante himself. He was a settled person with a job, wife, and children. He did not drink alcohol and spent his free time photographing and building models of old cultural buildings. 2. The person who called the police and reported seeing a black object hovering over the road next to his car. Unfortunately, Bengt Johansson, who made the call to the police, was never found. Perhaps he was afraid of being implicated as a witness to a flying saucer story, which is why he didn't get in touch. That it was Ante himself who made the call is unlikely, given the distance between him and the phone booth and the state of shock he was in when the police arrived shortly after the call. It is unfortunate that Bengt Johansson, if that is his real name, was never heard from again. 3. The police found Ante in a state of shock, and this state was confirmed by the hospital. It is beyond doubt that Ante Jonsson had experienced something very frightening on the road that night. It is not possible to simulate the convulsions and the state of shock that both the police and the doctor observed. Like Arno from the case in Finland in 1970 that I covered in a previous episode, Ante claimed that he later had contacts with beings that even took him to other places. He also claimed to have received visions of future events. We leave Sweden and head to Norway, where we encounter a case that came especially close to our hearts. It began as a simple note in a local newspaper. Children in the small community of Hönnefors had seen strange lights in the sky and described small beings moving near the edge of the forest. For most, it could have ended there, as an exciting but easily forgotten childhood tale. But thanks to social media, we managed to track down one of those children, now a grown man, and conduct an interview. As he spoke about that evening, it became clear that the memories were still vivid, even though decades had passed. What did the children actually see? Could it have been a natural phenomenon, an optical illusion, or was it something far more mysterious? It all began on the evening of October 28, 1985, in Hönnefors, Norway. The temperature was exactly 0 degrees Celsius, and the Earth's shadow had already begun to pass over the moon, creating the partial darkness of a lunar eclipse. And while most eyes were on the darkening moon, 7 children playing outside witnessed something far more unsettling. A strange light appeared in the sky, growing larger, closer, and more impossible with each passing second. What followed would defy explanation and leave the small town questioning what really happened that night. 2 days later, a strange headline in the October 30th, 1985 edition of Ringerikes Blad caught ufologist Leif Havek's attention. The headline read, "Thus did strange creatures run around at Hengsla." The area of Hengsla, located near Hönnefors in southeastern Norway, is typically a quiet and uneventful village, surrounded by dense woods and peaceful countryside, making this report all the more unusual. The article continued with the ominous line, "Anything can happen during a lunar eclipse." Initially, ufologist Leif Havek assumed it to be a practical joke, a playful fabrication in a local paper. But then, he received a call from a member of UFO Norway, an organization dedicated to investigating unexplained phenomena, who was living in Hönnefors. He relayed the story with sincerity and promised to look into the case further over the coming days. Without yet having the complete results of his colleague's investigation, Leif decided to join him at Hengsli with his team's resources. Hopefully, they would be able to bring some clarity to this remarkable series of events. From his investigation, we understand how all began on that Monday in October. At 5:45 p.m., 7 children were playing outdoors in Hengsli during the early stages of a lunar eclipse. The cold autumn evening was darkening as the moon started to slip behind the Earth's shadow, casting eerie shades across the landscape. Suddenly, the children noticed a light in the sky, initially distant but rapidly growing in size as it approached. The light halted in midair and descended closer to the ground. According to the children's descriptions, the object resembled a saucer with a dull grayish hue. It emitted a powerful light from its underside, accompanied by several weaker lights around its periphery. One of the children, Havard, curious and perhaps a little braver than the others, shone his flashlight at the object from a distance of approximately 200 meters. What followed startled them. In response, the object returned a brilliant beam of light, far brighter than car headlights at full intensity, momentarily blinding them. Moments later, the object slowly ascended back into the sky before accelerating and vanishing from sight. Just as they thought the experience was over, the children suddenly became aware of movement all around them. Just as they thought the experience was over, the children suddenly became aware of movement all around them. From seemingly out of nowhere, small beings, each about 50 centimeters tall, began appearing, scattered across the playground and the surrounding area. The creatures seemed intent on hiding from the children's view, quickly darting behind trees and playground structures when noticed. The children were mesmerized and curious about what was happening. When one of them rushed inside to grab a camera, the creatures vanished, only to reappear shortly after, as though playing a game of hide-and-seek. The children's descriptions of the creatures were detailed. They said that some of the beings were entirely black, others white, while some had a mixture of white and brownish tones. Their clothing was similarly colored, but despite the strangeness of their appearance, the children said they could easily make out the beings' arms and hands. These small figures seemed to be everywhere, on the road, in the playground, and even moving around nearby houses. As the small beings scurried about, they seemed to communicate with each other in low, incomprehensible murmurs. Their movements were unusual since they leaned forward as they ran, adding an unnatural quality to their already bizarre appearance. The children noticed that when they turned on the light, the creatures would retreat toward darker areas, only to re-emerge once the light was turned off. The encounter lasted until around 9:15 p.m., by which time many of the children, frightened by the increasingly bizarre scene, had fled to their homes. Yet, despite their vivid and consistent stories, none of the parents believed them. Even when they begged their parents to step outside and see for themselves, no adults ventured into the night to verify their claims. Despite their best efforts, the children could not convince any adults to take their stories seriously. Not even when it was revealed that a 50-year-old jogger who had passed by during the incident also had encountered something odd. When asked about the time and location in question, he recalled that he believed something, which he thought was a cat, had suddenly darted between his legs. Yet he didn't seem to grasp the larger significance of what had happened that night. In the hours that followed the encounter, some of the children who had been directly illuminated by the first object reported feeling nauseated. This discomfort, though brief, added another layer of intrigue to the already strange events of the evening. Later that night, they claimed to have seen 2 or 3 additional shining objects in the sky, although none of these appeared to land as the first one had. In the garden, strange tracks were discovered the next morning. The tracks, which measured between 7 and 11 centimeters in diameter, were shaped oddly, some resembling a half moon. The family's dog reacted wildly to these tracks, barking frantically and trying to dig its way under the fence, as though it wanted to escape from something it sensed. Unfortunately, before the tracks could be properly examined, the dog partially destroyed them, and the garden was raked shortly afterward, erasing much of the physical evidence. The quiet village of Hengsla had never seen anything like it, and while the children's fantastic story was met with disbelief, the peculiar details and consistency in their accounts left a lingering mystery that begged further investigation. Whatever had transpired that night during the lunar eclipse, it had left an indelible mark on those who witnessed it. The question remained, what exactly had they seen, and could there be an explanation beyond the realm of the ordinary? During the course of our investigation and production of this episode, we came into contact with several first-hand witnesses. 2 of them was brave enough to speak with us directly, one through video conference and the other through messaging. The boy with the flashlight, Havard, sat down with us at Stories Lost and shared some of his experience to the best of his recollection. During our conversation, it was clear that the experience had left a lasting impression and a haunting effect on his adolescence and later life. The lingering strangeness revealed itself in subtle ways over time, making small things, like sci-fi movies or supernatural references, oddly repulsive. So now we circle back to the beginning. Havard and his 2 friends, Freddie and Rune, were playing outside in Hengsla, a residential area in Hönnefors. The neighborhood is known for its terrace apartment blocks, built in the 1970s. It's Freddie that first spots the strange object and the one who points it out to his friends. Freddie tells Stories Lost. I remember looking straight at something we thought was a spaceship in the sky. Everyone got scared and ran. The strange thing was that it seemed to be standing still, but suddenly it was gone. It's hard when you're a child because kids make each other scared and imaginative. Shadows and sounds and all that. That's one thing, but this seemed so clear. Hubbard stresses how unreal it felt to see the strange mass glide over the rooftops, and stops to question himself about what kind of reference points they as kids used in order to process the experience, because the experience was so strange and they were so very young. That night, the group of boys were out in Hubbard's backyard, chit-chatting about every other thing, like which transformer is the coolest, when Freddy sees something above the rooftops and exclaims, "It's an airplane." Hubbard cries out, "It's not an airplane, it's a UFO." At the time, Hubbard wasn't even sure if he knew what a UFO was or what the acronym stood for. We all watched in awe as the object silently glided through the sky. It looked incredibly dense, almost as if it defied the way things should move. Hubbard tried to get his parents' attention to tell them about the UFO, but they dismissed him rather nonchalantly. Undeterred, the boys decided to pursue the strange craft. When they reached the playground, they bumped into another group of slightly older kids, Lars, Helene, May, and Bertil. Together they began to notice how the phenomenon, or objects, would appear, disappear, and then reappear, which led them to believe there were multiple objects or ongoing activities. It happened so often that it started to feel almost normal. They would shrug it off thinking, "Oh, there's another one." However, 2 moments in particular truly frightened them. At one point, while they were shining the flashlight toward the object, they felt as though one of the objects changed direction and started heading straight for them. They ran as fast as they could and hid inside a garbage shed, huddling together and watching as the object hovered above them briefly before it shifted course again. The second time the boys experienced a real scare was about 30 minutes later, when Freddy, standing on the staircase of one of the terraced houses again, shined the flashlight in the direction of the object. Rune and Havard screamed at him to stop from their hiding place, but it was too late. The object began to approach them, making the boys flee as fast as they could. Meanwhile, the flashlight's battery had run out, and Havard, in a rush, made a quick stop at his house to replace it. Freddy and Rune waited for him in the parking space on the other side of the house. Eager to catch up, Havard took a shortcut through the backyard and was about to jump the fence when, halfway across the lawn, he spotted something out of the corner of his eye, standing near one of the garden shrubs. He stopped and aimed the flashlight at it, and suddenly, the thing jolted toward him. He tried to keep his gaze fixed on it as it approached at lightning speed, but then, in an erratic move, it abruptly changed direction, stopped about 5 meters away, and disappeared. Although the thing abruptly vanished, it left a clear mark, a circular burn, still visible the next day and for some years to come. In total, there proved to be 4 burn marks, 1 large circle, 2 slightly smaller circles, and the 4th resembled a footprint. It took 4 to 5 years before they disappeared, and no amount of moving the grass had any effect on the imprints. Freddy tells stories lost. We were so young, so I only remember small parts of it. But the marks in Havard's yard, I remember those well. It's hard to explain how something could have happened right there, because there were houses all around. But the marks, the tracks in the grass, the bent grass, were clear. Havard reacts with a serious laugh when he looks at the sketch he made as a child of the entity he encountered. Yes, he recognizes that the oblong shape is the truest part of his observation. The second drawing most likely being a post-construct, produced in an effort to explain the unexplainable, with the help of those frames of reference he held at the time. Havard tells us that he has never voluntarily spoken about this at school, later in life, or with the people involved who still live in the community. He also felt uncomfortable whenever people referenced the issue or identified him as one of the 7. Havard's communication with Stories Lost breaks this long silence, and we of course hope to do justice to him and the other children in our episode. Now to the case that forever changed our channel. Our very first UFO episode, the one that in many ways laid the foundation for everything we do today. Looking back on that episode brings mixed emotions. There's a lot we would have done differently if we recorded it today. The technology was simpler, the storytelling more direct, and the footage had a raw, ghostly quality we might not choose now. But there's also a certain charm in that. It was honest, passionate, and captured exactly the sense of enigma and mystery that we always strive to convey. Without this episode, and without you viewers who supported us from the beginning, the channel might never have become what it is today. So with all that said, here is the case that started it all. The incident in the small village of Bispberg, in central Sweden in the winter of 1987, is one of the more unusual ones. Despite thorough investigations by serious investigators, the mystery of what really happened that night remains. It is 5 minutes to 1 on the night of Thursday, December 31st, 1987. Karin and Rune Lagerstrand are fast asleep in their beds on this cold winter night, when both Cinda, their border collie, and the cat make noises. They seem worried and want to go outside. A sleep-deprived Karin gets out of bed, pulls a sweater over her nightgown, and lets the animals out. Cinda hesitates and Karin urges her to go outside. The cat strokes her bare legs a few times before joining Cinda in the yard. A sparkling, starry sky envelops the entire neighborhood. A half-full moon hangs over the neighbors' birch trees. Cinda sniffs frantically at the week-old snow, while the cat stands still and looks out at the street. It is completely quiet and still. The cold bites into Karin's cheeks and she calls out several times for Cinda to hurry. Finally, the dog sits down to pee, and as soon as she is done, she runs back to the front door. The cat follows closely behind, and Karin can finally shut out the cold. She takes off her sweater and crawls back into the warmth of her bed, hoping to sleep for many long hours. But soon Cinda is heard whimpering again, while the cat meows and tramples on the bedspread. As Karin tries to get her husband to go out this time, Cinda begins to growl and bark. Since her husband shows no signs of waking up, Karin decides to ignore the animals, as they have just been outside. But they don't give up and continue in the same manner until shortly after 3 o'clock, when her husband finally wakes up and they both decide to get up and get dressed to find out what the animals are up to. While Karin gets dressed, she looks out the bedroom window, hoping to see something that might explain everything, maybe some wild animal that is scaring the dog and the cat, but she doesn't see anything. She opens the front door, and both animals go out. Cinda runs down to the flagpole and stops dead in her tracks. She tucks her tail between her legs, and her teeth are chattering in her jaws. Thinking she must have seen a badger, Karin rushes back into the house to exit the house through the kitchen, toward the flagpole. As she walks through the kitchen, she notices that it is now 3:30, and as soon as she steps out the kitchen door, she smells a very strong odor of sulfur, and when she looks up, she sees an ice blue object shaped like a giant light bulb, hanging at the height of some birch trees, about 1,500 feet away from her. The object has a cold metallic blue color, while an aura of light gray haze with splashes of orange surrounds it. Although the object glows, none of the light is reflected in the trees. It is wider than it is high, and later Karin estimated the size to be 20 by 26 feet. While Karin is standing there, things start to happen at the bottom of the object. She sees a neck-shaped opening where lightning bolts come out that resemble long spears. They are straight like lances with a point at the front. The spears shoot out from the object all the time, one by one. It seems that the lightning is somehow ejected and then pulled back into the sphere. As she stands there, dressed only in her nightgown and a sweater, something happens that scares the hell out of her. Karin can feel her jaw clenching, and she gets goosebumps all over her body. But worst of all, she gets the feeling that something is sucking on her forehead over her left eye. Karin says afterwards, "I was paralyzed. I couldn't call for help and I couldn't get out of there. It was horrible. I was so scared that I was completely destroyed. My husband had gone back to bed and I couldn't call out to him. I was just shaking." After about 5 minutes, the object suddenly disappears, sideways and down, and only then can she move again. But just as she turns around, her right shoulder blade stings. Just before her husband went back to sleep, he heard a buzzing sound like a car idling and thought it was the oil boiler that was acting up. But he was so tired that he didn't get up to check it. He later said that he also felt anxious and that the air seemed heavy. In the morning, he also discovered that his wristwatch had stopped. When Karin comes back in, the kitchen clock shows 25 minutes to 4 in the morning. Although the object is gone, the smell of sulfur remains. Both her dog and she smell of sulfur. Her skin is still lumpy, and her jaw feels stiff. While she makes coffee, the dog and cat calm down. Karen gives Cinda some candy and the cat goes to sleep in the closet. Around 4 o'clock, Rune takes Cinda for her usual walk and smells a strong creosote-like odor. Cinda is nervous and sniffs around, and sometimes she huddles together. On New Year's Day, Karen discovers a long burn mark on the back of the sweater she was wearing. And 4 days after the incident, a faint smell still lingers in the air around the house. Karen also had headache for 4 days after the incident, and the tingling in the shoulder remained for more than 10 years. But it didn't end there. The incident became the beginning of a long period of illness for Karen. She suffered from several inflammations and often felt tired and lethargic. In February 1988, she was taken to the doctor to have a loose bone fragment removed from her right leg. The bone chip was later found to be calcified fatty tissue. To analyze the burn mark on Karen's sweater, some UFO investigators sent it to the Swedish Defense Research Agency for analysis, and by the end of June 1988, the answer came. The so-called burn mark was not a burn mark. The dark color was caused by fibers of a different and darker type being welded to the fibers of the sweater. The fact that a bundle of fibers was both transported and welded to the shirt in this way indicated a strong electrostatic phenomenon, with localized sparking at the relevant point on the body. On September 10, 1988, 7 months after the incident, Karen discovers another mark on the curtain by the kitchen door where she was standing during the observation. The height above the floor is 5 feet, which corresponds well with the mark on the sweater. But that's not all. Soon after, a new witness came forward. It was a 19-year-old man who worked as a cook that night in a hotel in a nearby town. On the night of December 31st, 1987, he was driving home from work, as he had done so many times before. Between 1 and 1:30 a.m., he saw a blue light with a red glow over a mountain near Bispberg. What the hell can that be? He thought, and stopped the car. At first, he thought the light was attached to a plane, but soon he saw that it wasn't moving. He probably sat there for about 10 minutes looking at the light through the windshield. I saw it very clearly, but I put it down and moved on. As I got closer to home, I could still see the light, and it got bigger as I got closer. I have driven that road many times before and after this incident, but I have never seen that light again. If it had been a stationary light, I would have seen it more often. Did the young man see the same phenomenon that Karen saw later that night? We will probably never know for sure. But for Karen, who died in 2015, one thing was very clear. She never wanted to see it again. It felt like I was looking at evil itself. The final case in this compilation holds a special place in our hearts because it came to us through one of our viewers. Someone reached out and shared their story, and we soon realized that the place where the events took place was far from unfamiliar. Björkvik is in fact a location with a long history in Swedish UFO circles. Over the years, UFO Sweden has conducted several investigations in the area, following numerous reports from independent witnesses. As we began to dig deeper, we discovered intriguing connections between previously documented events and our viewer's account. Being able to link old investigations with new, unique testimonies is always one of our goals. It's not always possible, but in this case, we had the chance to do just that. What is it about Björkvik that makes reports of unexplained phenomena keep pouring in? And what are people really seeing? It is an early Saturday in September 1989. It's just after 6 p.m. Jonsson and her 13-year-old daughter Tina, who is sitting in the back seat, are traveling in a car. They have just dropped off a friend of Tina's at the bus station in Björkvik. Shortly after, they turn onto a road called Sandviksvägen. Kerstin notices something strange hanging above the trees a little way down the road. Kerstin draws Tina's attention and points out what she sees. The car approaches the location of this unexplained sight. Kerstin halts the car when it reaches a point where a large disc-shaped metallic object is hovering completely motionless just above the treetops. Fear grips her daughter Tina, who tells her mother to continue and drive back home. Kerstin rolls down the window. Meanwhile, the object remains completely silent. Kerstin estimates that the object has a diameter of 15 meters and that it is about 15 meters up in the air. On the underside of the object, they see 3 lights flashing irregularly in red, yellow, and green. Kerstin opens the car door and puts her foot down to get out of the car. Tina shouts, "You're crazy, you can't!" Kerstin stops herself. At the same moment, the object starts to rotate and floats out over the road. Tina starts crying and throws herself into the back seat. Kerstin can now see the object from the side and sees that it has a dome with yellow windows. The object quickly floats back over the treetops and then sets off at a tremendous speed out over the nearby Lake Ingaren. Kerstin now quickly drives home, and when they get home, the rest of the family is sitting at the dinner table. Kerstin and Tina tell them what they have been through, but the others find it hard to believe them. Kerstin's husband, Sture, sees that Tina is very pale and realizes that something must have happened. Sture says at a later point, "They were upset when they came home. Tina was absolutely terrified. Sture feels he has no reason to distrust his wife and daughter. They don't usually make up stories," he says. The information about the 1989 sighting came to the attention of the organization UFO Sweden 5 years later, when a representative gave a talk about UFOs in Björkvik in 1994. Kerstin then told them that there were more witnesses to this sighting. Firstly, her daughter had spoken to a classmate who had seen the same object. However, the classmate was unwilling to talk to UFO Sweden about the sighting. Kerstin also spoke of a neighboring couple in the area who were also said to have seen the object, but they have since moved away. We fast forward to July 27, 2008, when an anonymous report is received by UFO Sweden that can quickly be linked to the 1989 sighting. The anonymous submission to UFO Sweden recounts the following events. It so happened that we were sitting in the car, me, my sister, and Mom, on our way home when we suddenly saw something strange on the left side of the road. We were traveling north-northwest with Lake Ingaren on our left. My sister screamed first and pointed to a strange dark cloud over the middle of the lake. When I looked out, I saw it too. A strange oval object, completely still and unlike any cloud we had ever seen. We shouted to Mom to stop the car, and she slammed on the brakes, convinced that we had hit a moose or some other large animal. But when all 3 of us looked out, we saw the same mysterious shape hovering in the air. The object was huge, at least 7 to 8 meters, maybe 9, and seemed unreal. We got out of the car and approached cautiously, but no other car passed by to see what we saw. We stood there, transfixed by the sight that was unlike anything we had ever experienced before. We tried to make sense of what we were seeing. Was it a zeppelin, a balloon, an airplane? But nothing made sense. After a while, the object started to move. It was dark, dull, and flashed faintly underneath, but we were still too far away to make out the details. Suddenly, it disappeared with a jolt, without a sound or any ripples on the water below it. Before this, the craft had been hovering just above the treetops, and the disappearance was so bizarre we could hardly believe our eyes. All evening, we talked about what we had seen, puzzled and confused by the inexplicable event. Sometime after the September 1989 sighting became public knowledge and attracted media attention, in October 1994, another report reached UFO Sweden. This time it was from a woman, also in Björkvik, who described a similar sighting several years earlier, in the spring of 1981 or 1982. The woman, then 15 years old, was at her home about 150 meters from where the mother and daughter, Kerstin and Tina, had made their sighting in 1989. At 3 p.m., the young girl remembers how she suddenly heard a sound similar to several fighter planes. Curious and worried, she went to the window to see what was happening outside. Outside, in the cul-de-sac in front of her home, she saw a circular craft that had several light sources along its outer edge. The lights shone in different colors: red, yellow, white, blue, and green. The craft, which resembled a classic saucer, was estimated to be around 10-15 meters in diameter. Puzzled and horrified, she stood there for 30 to 60 seconds looking at the mysterious object, frightened by what she saw, before she pulled down the blinds and went back into the house. She never saw the object disappear. The woman's experience helped to further strengthen the mystique surrounding the strange phenomena in Björkvik. A lot was going on in and around Björkvik, so much so that UFO Sweden decided to make a visit, knock on doors and talk to the people living there, and listen to their observations. The following stories were gathered at that time. On a winter day in 1987, sometime between 4 p.m. and 5 p.m., a 13-year-old boy was on a small slope near his home, just north of Björkvik. He was skiing with his brother and a neighbor. Suddenly, the boy fell and ended up on his back in the snow. When he looked up, he saw something that took his breath away. A large, round, disc-shaped object hovering directly above him. Shocked, he realized that his brother and neighbor also saw the mysterious object. It seemed to be hovering very close to the ground, but despite its proximity, no sound was heard. After a few seconds, the object started moving away, towards Björkvik. The boy followed it with his eyes and saw a spherical reddish glow appear on the horizon. Terror gripped all three of them, and they ran from the scene as fast as they could. It turns out that this boy was a classmate of the girl Tina, who observed the similar sighting in September 1989. Although he is unsure of the exact date of the incident, he remembers that he was perhaps younger than 13 and that he had received the skis as a Christmas present. This places the incident sometime after Christmas. Although it is unlikely that this sighting has a direct temporal link to the reports from 1989 or 81-82, it remains a puzzling mystery. Was it the same object seen on the other occasions? Despite the uncertainty surrounding the details, this sighting remains an important part of the enigmatic story of Björkvik and its sky. One evening around 1989, a couple was out for an evening walk in Björkvik when something strange caught their attention. In the sky, in the direction of Lake Ingeren, a discus-shaped light hovered, motionless and mysterious. The couple was standing in a playground near the gas station, about 500 meters west of where Kirsten and Tina made their observation. Fascinated and puzzled by the size of the object, the couple tried to estimate its extent. The man took out a 20-centimeter ruler he had in his pocket, but quickly realized that the ruler was not long enough to cover the object even at arm's length. The strange object hung motionless in the air before slowly moving away in a northerly direction, making a faint humming sound. They are convinced that they may have witnessed the same strange object that Kirsten and Tina saw in September 1989. Unfortunately, they are unsure of both the year and month, so the connection remains a mystery. It was a Tuesday evening in late August, probably in the 1990s, just after 22 p.m. Bo had left a dance party at Broby and was sitting out in the woods around Endebol, north of Ingeren. As a hunter, he was casually scouting for game whenever he had the opportunity and the inclination. However, this late evening, what should have been a quiet rest from the buzz of the social scene suddenly took a completely unexpected turn. It was 22:10 when I saw a ball come up from the south and move over the treetops, then disappear some distance away. The whole sighting took maybe 20 to 25 seconds. Then, maybe a minute later, a similar orb appeared in the same place, followed the same path and disappeared in the same place as the first one, says Bo. He describes the orbs as round and luminous, as big as the sun but not as dazzling. The weather was clear and it was still quite bright outside. I would really like to know what it was I saw, he says. This mysterious experience, which took place in the middle of a calm and clear evening, remains a mystery to Bo and others who have experienced similar phenomena in the area. One evening around 1994, a mother and her daughter were at their farm, about 7 kilometers southeast of Björkvik, ready to pick up and leave by car. The mother sat down in the driver's seat. Suddenly, the whole car started vibrating and shaking. At that same moment, the mother heard her daughter shouting from outside. She got out of the car and saw an intense white light above the house. The light, which was round or oval, was so big that it covered the whole building. A roaring sound, reminiscent of an idling truck but much louder, filled the air. The mother rushed inside to call her neighbors, only to discover that the phone line was dead. No tone could be heard. She estimated that the object was hovering at a height of 10 to 20 meters above ground. After a while, the light moved to the neighbor's yard, about 100 meters away. where it stopped briefly before shooting off to the east at an incredible speed. The whole event lasted between 5 and 10 minutes. There were more reports obtained during the door-knocking session. Check out the report Project Ingaren by Johan Gustafsson on UFO Sweden to read about them. Through the comments section here on YouTube, a viewer reached out to Stories Lost. He had information to add to this case file and wanted to pass on to our audience an observation he had made in Björkvik. Let us listen. My mother has a house outside Björkvik, where I have spent many years exploring the incredible natural surroundings. I have a strong interest in both nature and space, and I have worked as a fly fishing guide, growing up in the woods and around the lakes in the area. I also do amateur astrophotography and spend many nights observing and photographing the night sky. Björkvik is quite special because almost everyone you meet there has seen something strange or other. My mother has worked with elderly people, and I have been lucky enough to meet many of these people, almost all of whom had a story or two to tell. Unfortunately, most of these older people are no longer with us. I have seen many strange things in the sky in Björkvik, but one event really stands out. On August 13th, 2022, after a very long day of farm chores like tending the garden and taking care of the ducks, I was sitting on the porch smoking a cigarette. My mother was inside, but it was almost 3 in the morning, and I was the only one outside. Through the branches of our big oak tree, I saw what I first thought was the moon. It was about the size of a coin and had a cold blue glow, but suddenly it started moving obliquely downward at a 45-degree angle. I thought at first that I was just tired after a long day of hard work. Then I quickly realized that the moon at that time should be on the other side of the house. Looking up, I saw that the cold blue light had become slightly larger and was definitely continuing to head obliquely down towards the yard. I was now convinced and excited that I might for the first time see up close a meteorite strike. I quickly got up and ran to the back of the yard, keeping my eyes on the light, which was now moving at a faster pace at the same 45-degree downward angle. I thought that not only would I see an incredible meteorite impact, but that I might also be able to find the meteorite in the field behind the farm. But I suddenly noticed that it had no tail and was completely round. A fraction of a second later, the light changed course slightly, and instead of coming straight towards the back field, it was now moving straight towards the back of the farm to where I was running. In the darkness and my quick sprint in order not to miss this, I stumbled down a 5 to 6 meter high hill at the back of the farm. For the first time, I lost sight of the light for a short time. When I got up, I saw that the light had stopped about 20 meters above me, just above the large oak tree in the yard. It was about 12-15 meters wide and covered the whole area. The light was fascinating, quite cold, but it was not hard on the eyes. It was so bright that the whole backyard looked like it was drenched in daylight. The light was completely still for maybe 1 or 2 seconds, totally silent, but it felt like much more time had passed. It was incredible, like a scene from a Hollywood movie. Just as I was thinking this, the object accelerated rapidly across one bay of the lake Ingaren, and in a second, it had passed over to the other side of the lake, about 6 kilometers away. No sonic boom, no sound at all, just a total instantaneous acceleration. At this point, I realized that like an idiot, I was simply holding my mobile phone that I had frantically tried to get out of my pocket while running, trying to get the camera going. I only managed to take one bad picture before the light disappeared out of sight over the lake. I attached my bad cell phone picture, which is the only proof I have that this happened to me. It's not much to come by, but this event, I will never forget as long as I live. I never reported this, because I don't want the attention, and don't feel I need to convince anyone. It was enough to convince myself. I have spent my whole life in nature, fishing and hiking, but I have never ever seen anything like this. The speed, the course that changed twice, the hovering over me, no sound, 20 meters above me. Just crazy. There is something about Björkvik, Ingaren, and the lakes nearby. Thank you for watching, and thank you for being a part of Stories Lost.